now. Please go on.
Okay, so thanks to everyone for attending. What I'm going to start by doing is giving a very brief introduction to the project for anyone who's online today who isn't one of the participants. And then I'm going to go through some of the results from the work package that I've been leading. And then after that, there's several presentations from different facilities who've implemented remote NMR in different ways. And also Goran Carlson from Gothenburg is going to talk about GDPR and NMR. What does it mean? And this is a topic which is part of work package 2. And we will shortly be sending out a very short survey for people to complete on GDPR in their NMR facility. And we thought it would be useful for him to give an introduction to GDPR so you know what why we're asking the questions in the survey. Sorry, something's not right with my PowerPoint. Okay, so the idea behind the project, and you can see on the map of Europe the various different countries and labs that are participating. Before the COVID pandemic, most people sat in front of the NMR machine and collected data on site. But because of the lockdown and various restrictions that in some countries went on for many, many months, we had to quite quickly come up with a different way of allowing access to NMR, particularly for COVID-19 related research. And so very quickly, many different NMR facilities implemented remote access, but we all implemented it kind of in slightly different ways. And so the idea of the first part of the R-NMR project is to collect information about how people do this implementation, and then to try to feed that into other work packages to come up with a kind of a general guideline for how remote access might work to its best capability. So within the project, there are a number of different objectives which have to do with coming up with a common protocol for remote access, but also common procedures for sample shipment. And we're also investigating the carbon footprint and how we might decrease the carbon footprint of NMR facilities. The project started in July 2022, and it will continue for 3 years. So the work package I'm involved with is work package 2, looking at the remote NMR landscape. And this is really focusing, this work package is the activity is in the first half of the 3-year project. And the first things we've been looking at is to review the current protocols which were put in place for remote access during the pandemic, and also to survey users to identify their needs and to stratify them as inputs for the other work packages which are coming up with a standard protocol. And this was really done using 2 surveys, and many of you participated in the survey. So the first was to review the current protocols in place at NMR facilities, and this involved a survey of NMR facility managers. So the survey was launched in November last year, and we had a total of 142 responses from NMR facility managers. So that was really great, from over 25 countries in Europe. There's a report summarizing the results, which you can access on the R-NMR website if you're interested in reading about the details. But I thought I would just highlight some of the main points. So the first thing is that the vast majority of spectrometers currently in use in Europe are Bruker spectrometers, but there's still a significant number of labs that do have Agilent variant equipment or jail equipment. But I think a lot of the efforts will go into the implementation of remote NMR focused on Bruker hardware. And then within, we also asked what's acquisition software. And most users or most labs are using TopSpin, but actually what became very clear is that there's a whole range of different versions of TopSpin that are currently in use. And in many cases, it's certainly the case on some of our spectrometers, we're unable to upgrade the version of TopSpin due to hardware considerations. And so I think any implementation of remote NMR has got to take into account the fact that people are using a wide range of versions of the TopSpin software. And then there's an almost equal distribution between TopSpin being run on Linux-based computers and TopSpin being run on Windows-based computers. We looked at the kinds of levels of expertise, and more than half of the labs did define their users or give access to users depending on their level of expertise. And the users in our community range from very non-expert users to what we'd call standard users who are just using standard Bruker pulse sequences, to more expert users who are allowed to implement their own pulse sequences. And again, any remote NMR needs to take into account the different levels of expertise of the user community. So about 50% or more than 50% of the NMR facilities surveyed had implemented remote access in some form. About 41% had not implemented remote access. The reasons for not implementing remote access tended to be either that there was no demand for remote access from users, and that this may have been that the restrictions weren't very significant during the pandemic, or that there were IT security concerns, which meant that they weren't allowed to make spectrometer access available, say, outside of an Ethernet network. So I think IT security concerns is something the project has to take into account. What we found was that people were using quite a range of different software packages to implement remote access. In the survey, we specifically asked about AnyDesk, NoMachine, and TeamViewer, but actually there were a lot of facilities that were using other software, and the other software included things like DW Service, VNC, FastViewer, SplashTop, and Guacamole. So you can see that there are a lot of different ways of implementing remote access, and we need to consider which of these programs or which of these packages is the most we should be supporting. I would say we probably want to support a wide range of these because the choice of package may be dependent on the specific IT setup in different NMR facilities. Then we asked, now that most restrictions are gone, were the NMR facilities still using remote access? And the vast majority said yes, remote access was still being used, and I think it's something that's here to stay. And then for the 40% of facilities that hadn't implemented remote access, we asked them that if our project comes up with a standard protocol, would they want to implement it? And the majority of those did want to implement it in the future. So that's a good sign. So the second survey was really asking the users for their perceptions of remote access and trying to identify any particular issues or bottlenecks that they had identified. And we did ask a number of questions relating to sample shipment, because that's one of the issues that we're looking at in task 2.4. So this survey was sent out earlier this year, and we had responses from just over 400 NMR users representing 24 countries in Europe. And again, there's a report summarizing the results of the survey on the website. The people who completed the survey ranged in their, I guess, level of where they were in their careers. We had quite a few responses from graduate students, postdocs, but also research group leaders, also staff scientists who may be NMR technicians or engineers, and other research scientists in academia, but also a number of research scientists working in industry. Of the responses, probably the majority of users were doing solution state NMR rather than solid state NMR. We're going to hear next from Trent Franks from Warwick, who'll be able to tell us about solid state NMR implementations. But I would think solution NMR may be slightly more easy to do by remote access than solid state, and that's probably why the majority of users were using solution state NMR. And then the users were asked to sort of categorize themselves in terms of expertise. So we had most people said they were standard users, but we also had some non-expert users and some expert users who were running their own pulse sequences. Again, we had about 50% of the users surveyed had used remote access in some way, and about half of them hadn't used remote access. So we asked them why they hadn't used remote access. In some cases, there were no restrictions in their country or their university during the pandemic, or that remote access wasn't available at their site. So similar responses to the NMR facility managers. Then we asked them if they consider sample shipment to an NMR facility to be a barrier to remote spectrometer access. And this is probably more important for people using national or transnational facilities. And more than half of the responses said they didn't, they did consider it to be an issue. And then we asked why. So various things. They're concerned about sample tubes breaking during shipment, that the sample would degrade during sample shipment. This might be important for protein samples or perhaps for air sensitive samples. So a number of different concerns, and this information is being fed into the task that's looking specifically at sample shipment. Then we asked some more specific questions about how their samples were shipped. So for example, some people shipped samples already loaded into solid state NMR rotors, whereas other people shipped the powders, and then the samples were put into the rotors at the local NMR facility by the facility team. So there's a range of different ways in which people were transporting their samples to the facilities. Again, we asked whether they were continuing to use remote NMR, and that seems to be quite still a popular access mode. That's certainly the case here in Oxford. And then for people who hadn't used remote access, we again, we did ask them if they would be interested. Oh, sorry, I've got this the wrong way around. This is the one for people who would be interested in implementing or using remote access if it becomes available at their facility. And the vast majority of people are still continuing to use remote access to do NMR. So those are the two surveys which have been completed, and the remaining tasks within the work package 2 involve analyzing general data protection requirements, which is law within the EU, and how that affects NMR. And you'll hear about that in one of the later talks. As I said, we'll also have a task looking at sample shipment, and also a task looking at the carbon footprint of NMR. For the 3 and 4 here, these two tasks will be completed by the end of this month, and there'll be a report which will go onto the website. And finally, at the end of December this year, when this work package finishes, we'll be producing an overall report summarizing the outputs from all the various tasks. So if you want to know more about R-NMR, and particularly to read the reports, you can find those on the website. There's also lots of information about updates for the project and events. And thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions. If there are any, there's going to be an opportunity for questions after each talk, but also some time for discussion at the very end. So I'll finish there.